one of the tasks which I was given was to write the annual report of our team. And this annual report will go to the Secretary General. And if you know anything about the United Nations, Secretary General is the final stop. That's the big guy. That's the one who is voted by the countries in the General Assembly as the head of the institution. So I had to draft this report every year.
In terms of somebody that dreamed of moving abroad, say, work at the United Nations, what's a non-negotiable thing for somebody to get there?
Well, the United Nations, because of the competition, they start at the master's level. So if you don't have a master's, don't even waste your time. Just go and do your master's. There are issues, obviously, which you are not happy with. You speak up. I had maybe just one incident where I had to speak up and said, no, I don't take this. This was to one of my bosses. I've had many bosses. I said, I don't take this. You respect me, I respect you. You don't respect me, forget it. I will not respect you. And of course, that boss was there.
Meaningful carriers now. Take the time to take your destiny in your hands now. With meaningful carriers.
Welcome, Mr. Gutu, to another episode. We are so humbled and happy to have you. We have learned quite a lot throughout the journey when you walked us through in episode 1, episode 2, now we're in episode 2. It's really my pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate Mr. Pagua. I appreciate this opportunity just to share, my life story and my challenges, my accomplishments and everything else.
The first question for anyone listening is, how did the United Nations door open for you?
So the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, and other institutions are, the areas, and of course the African Union and other bodies, even the SADC Secretariat, are the options and opportunities which any servant who wants to progress look up to. I must say, I applied so many times to the World Bank. I was interested in their financial management jobs where you become the regional manager, or they give you a division at the World Bank to manage. We were also traveling with our minister and the permanent secretary and other officials to the World Bank, to the IMF meetings, like twice. So I was familiar with that area. To the United Nations, we only had not so many meetings with them. But it's an institution which for us, Dr. Gizero had come from there. So we had an idea of that, and would make some, returns or reports which were also shared with the United Nations offices, including the local offices. So generally one would be aware, and if you are looking beyond your job as a civil servant in your country, you look up to those. So I did apply many times to the World Bank. I really wanted to get into the World Bank. But that door didn't open early. And so, I also attempted the International Monetary Fund, IMF, but the door also didn't open. But when I then came to the United States to work for the International Federation of Accountants, and we're now developing standards for the public sector, and we regarded the United Nations as one of our clients, so we began to hold meetings with them. To the extent that my boss in New York, and my boss in Australia, we discussed the possibility of engaging the United Nations and marketing our standards to them. We had already secured NATO and OECD as our clients, so those had adopted our standards, and we wanted the United Nations because it's a big and it's a global institution, and if they do adopt your standards, then you you know you've got real clients. So while still at the International Federation of Accountants, we had meetings at the United Nations with the Director of Finance and other directors. We even held one workshop and seminar where the United Nations called all its directors. And by the way, when we talk about the United Nations, if you don't know, you think, oh, it's just New York. No, the United Nations is made up of more than 40 global organizations, huge and massive. And you're talking about the UNDP, you're talking about UNICEF, you're talking about ILO, you're talking about many other organizations which are affiliated and are part of the United Nations. So what you have at the in New York is mostly what is called the United Nations Secretariat, right? And that is the biggest institution amongst the UN bodies. But there are many UN bodies. Some they don't even have like UN in front of their names, like the World Food Program, like the World Health Organizations. All those are United Nations organizations. So we held a workshop, and I'm sure there were more than 40 directors of the United Nations organizations, and we made ourselves pitch that, you know, you guys ought to adopt our standards from the International Federation of Accountants, because, you know, you are developing your own standards and implementing them is not credible in the financial management world. So, you know, you need independent standards. You implement them, then you're audited by independent auditors, and therefore your reports will be credible and regarded highly by your stakeholders. And that's what we kept, pushing, banging the door. And then we had an idea with my boss that why don't we create two seats on the board of the International Federation to adopt to give to the United Nations, so that they sit on our boards as we develop these standards. They are observers. They are aware. They can contribute. They can give us the inside story of what their challenges are and look for in the standards. So we had two members who sat on the board of we called it Public Sector Committee of the International Federation of Accountants, and they began to share with us what their challenges are and what their issues were. Some of the uniqueness of the United Nations was that while they had a kind of, they have the peacekeeping operations, which is a big thing. They go into countries where there's friction and strife. They maintain and and keep the peace in there. And so, but what happens is they ask their member countries to contribute troops and military wear and equipment. So the United Nations per se doesn't own the military equipment, and those military personnel which are assigned to them, they are not United Nations army, but they are. It's an army which is contributed by many nations. The United Nations, though, appoints the commanders of those military wings and the police force, and it is the United Nations who appoint the commander, who then reports to the chain of command of the United Nations, including all the United Nations organs. So that's when I began to know more and more about the United Nations, and we developed a friendship with the directors who were there, and I started networking with them, and and they would be asking many questions. What about this? And I would reply, I would respond. And when they came to our meetings, the court meeting, we would then engage them, and so that's how I began to know and thought about the opportunities that maybe I ought to be looking to to the United Nations instead of wasting my time with the World Bank and with IMF and all the other people. But when the door didn't open as quickly, because one of the issues which the United Nations is quite thorough about is if you have a blood relative, they have to do a vetting, and your case has got to go to a higher to see that there's no corruption, nobody trying to just get their brother or their cousin or somebody in. So my brother was working for UNDP in Harare. And so when I applied, they said, oh, okay, you have a blood brother in Harare who is working for the UN system, so we need to do some vetting. They did their vetting, but it took so long. And then, then I left the International Federation of Accountants to go to work for an NGO in Southern Africa, the capacity building, which we spoke about last week, IFAC, supporting the accountants general. So while I was there, then my brother proceeded to retire from UNDP. And then, when I inquired again, the director said, oh, if your brother is retired, it shouldn't be difficult. So when I left the Accountants General NGO and I returned to New York, I then, again applied. I wasn't receiving as much responses because thousands of people apply. When you're looking at the United Nations Secretariat I was talking about, the staff complement is 30,000. And they are spread globally everywhere. So the applications and everything else can be buried under so much. So, I networked, I contacted the director of finance and I said, listen, I've been applying forever. And you guys told me that you wanted me because you're starting a project in public sector accounting, adopting those standards which we were persuading you to. And he said, oh, yeah, I've been looking for you. Where are you? I said, I'm back in New York. And he says, have you applied? I said, yes, many times. So he said to me, oh, send me your reference number, which you got. So I sent him and then, okay, come to an interview. He set it up. I went there again, it was a good interview, basically just, catching up and telling them what I was doing in Southern Africa, which was really implementing those standards which they wanted to implement. So they saw me as a very good fit. And so they gave me an offer. So, Jerry, we would like to engage you, and so it's funny what in life. Lo and behold, while I am waiting on this offer at the UN, the World Bank contacts me, says, "Oh, Jerry, we want to send you for a consultancy to Indonesia for 3 weeks, 25,000, and
wow."
And so I was like, oh, okay. So I got in touch with the guys at the UN and I said, listen, I just need 1 month to prepare, then I can come and join you. I was like, go and make that 25,000. I come back and, I'm more. And the guy at the UN said, no, Jerry, if you cannot start next week, the offer is off the table. And I'm like, there goes the 25,000. So then I went to start work at the United Nations. This was August 2007. I started as a financial analyst. That's when I began my role. I joined a team of about 5 people. And they were beginning to work on applying those standards which are developed by the International Federation of Accountants and starting to prepare the United Nations organization to make sure that it is ready to implement these standards. That was 2007.
Right.
So our team initially basically was to do an analysis of the current state of financial reporting and application of accounting standards at the United Nations. This is just the Secretariat, right? And all the other 40-something bodies were also doing a similar exercise. So we looked at the standards which were in-house, and we looked areas where they were short, and we compared them to the international public sector accounting standards. So we're doing an analysis, a comparative analysis of the current position, and then identify gap analysis. So we came up with our report. Obviously, our report would go to the director of finance, and he was also meeting with the other directors and coordinating, a program. There was also another team which was called the system-wide team. We were a team just for the United Nations Secretariat, but there was another team which was coordinating all the United Nations organizations in terms of implementing the new standards. But this was just the beginning exercise, and it took months on end to look at, the accounting for income, for expenses, for assets, for liabilities, and all those other leases and all those issues which including how do we deal with these peacekeeping operations where we are loaned equipment in the military officials and the police officials. How do we account for it in our records? So all those issues, there's a standard which covers each and every aspect, and you'd have to look at your current financial reporting and then look at what these standards required to be done, and then you look at the gap, and then you can say, okay, so how are we going to implement this, and how are we going to cover the gap? Now, we were also working with the IT people, right? Because accountants are not necessarily IT people, but you got to work with the IT people because that's your infrastructure for your reporting. And so again, we had many other iterations and workshops with the IT people and say, okay, so if you're going to change from this to that, what does it entail? Then they would do their programming and options, and we would do simulations, and we would do all those kinds of things, dry runs and testing and what have you, until, the product was complete. So we spent many, many years working on that. That was 2007, right, when I joined. And then we increased the team from about 5 to 8. And obviously each team member would be assigned work on what to do. I was the second in command. We were headed by a chief of section, so I deputized the chief. And so the chief would really focus on managing the relationship between the United Nations and then the system-wide. And also, of course, briefing and giving updates to the directors of finance and any other, issues which were required, including recruiting and, helping the team. I was tasked with managing the technical work in terms of supervising and working with each team member who was assigned a specific standard or a specific assignment or specific task. And I also was assigned other areas. So they would be working on that work, and then I would have to review it, discuss with them, and improve it, and so forth. Thankfully, I had garnered a lot of understanding and knowledge of the standards. First, when I was at the International Federation of Accountants, and then I maintained my relationships with my former boss. So if there was anything difficult or tricky out then, communicate, hey, Paul, I'm having challenges here. what does this really mean and how can we apply this? And he would always say, okay, Jerry, explain to me a little more so that I can understand the context and everything else. He would come back with feedback, or he would put me to one of his members of staff who would work with me until I understood. Then I came back. So that I found that to be critical. And if there's anything which I have learned in life, learn to network. Don't be funny in your job such that when you leave, you're not trying to contact people back there like, I'm not working with this guy. So I learned to polish my people skills, to be diligent, also to be helpful. I found that you always get payback in that connection. So we did that, and because of our size and the departments and the challenges which had to be attended to, it was really a mammoth task. It took us 7 years to work, on those standards to produce something which we would then say, okay, now we are adopting the standards. And other UN bodies had already adopted the standards. Like the first one, I think, was World Food. They jumped in early. Some of them, because they are much smaller and their coverage isn't as wide, so it was easy for them to move. And some of them, of course, had resources much more. UNDP also moved in quickly, and I think UNICEF and the World, the Population Fund, UNFPA, and many other small entities, they moved quickly. So that was helpful to us because it was like a precedent. We would learn from them in all the gatherings which we did, and they would be sharing that, this one is a big challenge. You really have to work on it, and in some cases, you have to get consultants from outside, and they work with you, and they give you that. So we were learning on one end, but we were also teaching our internal clients in our organization, because all the departments now, in one way or the other, the procurement department, and the operations department, and even the accountants, they all had a part to play in the execution, of course, of the budget and in the reporting. So we had to change and tweak a lot of things in conjunction with the IT people whom I spoke about. So it took us a lot of time, a lot of meetings, many meetings, which we engaged in. And then after, we then had to do a lot of pilots. We would go out to the United Nations offices. We went to the peacekeeping missions in Lebanon. We would spend like 2 weeks there working with them and going into whatever they have as inventory, as fixed assets, and getting to know what it is that they do and how this impacts on the accounting of financial reporting. So we did that. We went to Ethiopia, Addis. That's where some of the UN bodies are based. We went to Brindisi, which is in Italy. That's where we have our major warehouse, if you like to call. And so, accounting for the inventory and the things which are kept there is a mammoth task. And we went to Vienna, we went to Nairobi, we went to many places, and working on these assignments to make sure that at the end of the day, when we said we can implement the standard, we were writing procedures on how to implement the standards. So you'd have to interpret a standard, right, to put it in as clear layman's terms as possible for everybody to appreciate and to understand. And then you would have to work with the IT people, and then you'd have to workshop together with the IT people, with the accountants, in the field, in head offices and in regional offices. So it was a lot of travel, a lot of work. a lot of nitpicking, a lot of nitty-gritties, a lot of issues where there were various options, and we were trying to standardize. And so we had a lot of meetings to justify the options which we had selected, and then why this would be the optimum and the ideal. So, sometimes our bosses weren't convinced. They'll say, no, go and take a look at it again. And sometimes it can be quite frustrating, but it's the nature of the profession. You don't just thumb suck and think of something and say, this one will do. No. The people will quiz you, especially the committees of the organizations where you would go and present your paper. Boy, oh boy, you better be ready, because they will shake that paper and you have to defend it. By the time it is passed, you better pray that you won't have gray hairs by then. So we did that, as I said, for a couple of years. Then the other organizations began to adopt and implement, and we were learning from them. And our directors we now had a new director, and he pushed. He said, "Gentlemen and ladies, I'm not happy with your progress. Years you've been working on these procedures and policies and no implementation. I will not have it. You are implementing this year. I do not care for your policies and polishing them up. We are implementing, and then we can fix the wheels as the car moves." So 2014, we adopted the public sector accounting standards as the United Nations Secretariat, which was a big job because all those pilot tests and dry runs and simulations and everything else. And of course, the big thing is you have to discuss with your auditors. Are not convinced that you are doing the right thing. When you implement, then your accounts are qualified. And the qualification in the financial and to have, right? When you hear it, if you are not an accountant and you say the accounts will qualify, somebody says, "Oh, okay, that's good." It is not good. When your accounts are qualified, it means you have not met the standards. There are violations. There are things which are not up to standard. What is the problem? The problem is then your stakeholders won't have confidence in your reports. They will say either you are stealing money or you are just not able, you're up to the job, and that the reports are not comprehensive enough, and they are not giving them a true picture of what is happening. And obviously that is not something which you desire to have. So we had many discussions on all our policies, on all the standards with the auditors, and it was many sets of auditors, not just one. The United Nations is audited by the national audit offices of its member countries. The national audit offices are the auditors of the United Nations. So we meet with them, we discuss, we present to them. Some of them are very knowledgeable. Some of them didn't have much knowledge. So you had to school them, to teach them, and then they would catch up and what have you. So that also took quite some challenges. The job was quite interesting. Then, of course, my bosses the immediate boss was promoted. I was left in charge for a couple of months. They brought another new person. Then I would have to, again, almost of course, these are accountants, but they were not familiar with that outfit. It happened, I think, twice. They would bring somebody on board. Then I would have to be sharing with them and saying, "Hey, this is how we do it, and what have you, and what have you, and what have you." And people are different. So again, I just I didn't pick any attitude. Although I was a little bit surprised. I'm like, I am a seasoned officer. I know this thing. Why am I not being promoted? I got a little bit of like anybody else. Everybody wants to make progress, right? one of the tasks which I was given was to write the annual report of our team. And this annual report will go to the Secretary General. And if you know anything about the United Nations, Secretary General is the final stop. That's the big guy. That's the one who is voted by the countries in the General Assembly as the head of the institution. So I had to draft this report every year, the annual report for the Secretary General, and it would cover all the issues which we were dealing with in terms of the public sector accounting standards. For me, that was the peak of my engagement at the United Nations. I really was excited, about doing the Secretary General report on the International Public Sector Accounting Standards. So we did this, I think, from, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 2010. And I was the author. Obviously, my boss would review it thoroughly, and of course, it would be a back and forth iteration. I would get inputs also from my direct reports, and those staff were under me, and so this was one of the highlights, if you want to call it, of my career at the United Nations. I thoroughly enjoyed, doing that report. And it took us quite a bit of sometimes up to 3 months for that report to be cleared. Obviously, the Director of Finance would really, take a look at it and really, make sure that it is a report which is up to scratch, because it would be a report to be tabled in the General Assembly after the review by the Committee of Public Accounts, the equivalent. So that's one of the things which I thoroughly enjoyed. I also participated and supported my bosses when they went to the committees, that ACABQ as Committee on Administrative and Budget Questions. It is a tough one. So I would accompany my bosses, and sometimes they would be grilled, and I had to come up fast with the answers. But I had experience before, because I used to accompany a minister, and would appear before the Public Accounts Committee when I was working for the Ministry of Finance in Zimbabwe. So I had some experience with this, and so I was calm and comfortable with doing that. And my bosses were really impressed, and would commend me and say, "Oh, you're very cool and collected and calm." And of course, I didn't tell them that, listen, I'm coming from the hard hit area, and I've already gone through the fire and survived. So this was familiar territory. The other role which I played also was, after a couple of years, my bosses who were sitting on that committee at the International Federation of Accountants, which was continuing to develop new and more and additional standards. They got busier, and they said, "Jerry, you go to sit and represent us." So I became a board member of the International Federation of Accountants, an observer. That's the right term. And so I would then provide the link between the development of the accounting standards, the international public sector, and then the implementers, nations, and the other bodies. So I'd also come back with reports, and remember, these were the quarterly meetings which I used to organize, but somebody else was organizing, and now I was attending as a member of the board, as an observer on the board. I thoroughly enjoyed that too, because this is really global, and I got to meet with many board members now, almost at the same level, not as a member of staff or for presenting papers to them, but I would bring the comments and inputs of the United Nations organizations and obviously had input in a lot of the standards which were being developed there. I thoroughly enjoyed this role for years on end, and again, I deepened my relationships even with the staff. So the staff would provide a lot of materials, a lot of insights into the development, of the standards. So this is why I stayed at the United Nations, because I kept getting additional and exciting and new roles, and I felt fulfilled in my career. But in 2017, after we had adopted the standards for 3 years as the United Nations Secretariat, and we had received clean audit opinions, and of course, as an accountant, that's what you are dreaming for and praying for, that you get a good report from the auditors, and we did. So that's one of the things which I was happy about, and I had a section which I wrote in those reports, which was on the accounting policies of the United Nations. That would be my part, which I contributed to the audit reports which were produced, and all of them were clean audit reports. And so I also was happy. I felt fulfilled. In that career, and therefore was able to last that long. Then in 2017, our project was wound up because we had now implemented and we had divested all those roles and the standards to those in the accounting division, the operations division. So they were doing all the policies now and everything else. That's when I was then promoted to that outfit which was responsible for all the United Nations organizations. They called it the system-wide team. The system-wide team also was winding down, or was scaling down, right? So what they did is they scaled down the team to 3 people. And I was one of the 3, and I was promoted to be the head of the 3. Then later on, they removed the 2 and left me by myself. I must say it was a bit of a challenge, because now not only was I also, in charge of the financial reports and policies of the United Nations Secretariat, but of all the other 40 bodies. And the group was called the Task Force on Accounting Standards. I don't know why they called it task force, because it was just me and my chair. There was no force. There was no force there, but the work was there. One of the tasks was, of course, to stay in touch with the International Federation of Accountants board, which did, and to provide input there, and also now to be the link back to the United Nations network of organizations, the task force now. So also very challenging, very exciting work. Even though I was in my unit, I was the only person there. But of course, I was working in conjunction with the heads of the accounting units in all the bodies. And we would have, for the task force, we had 2 critical meetings. We had many other meetings, but we had 2 critical meetings. And the first one was a virtual meeting. The second one was an in-person meeting, which would last a week. Now, the virtual one was just to get updates and feedback from the 40 United Nations organizations in terms of their financial reporting. Where are they? What are the challenges? Have they received their audit opinion? Is it a clean audit opinion, or they've been qualified? What are the issues? So we do that. It would be a virtual one morning, I think a couple of hours, maybe 4 hours. Everybody gives their feedback and so forth. And my director was the chair of that outfit. So would have to do reports. And then I would then start planning our meeting. in our annual meeting, we would have all the 40 UN entities, and I would invite the International Federation of Accountants to come and give us an update of the new standards they are working on and the challenges which they are facing and things like that. And then sometimes we would of auditors to come and also share with us their issues. We also would find some smart guys, some of them consultants, and some of them were from the network of the accountants, who would come and tell us about issues like what does the future look like for an accountant. And that's when we would talk about AI and blockchain and all the other things which were coming on stream, so that we are all, kept ahead. So for me, it was very exciting because I had so much trust with my bosses. They left me to organize the agenda and to find the speakers and to arrange the venues. So in terms of the venues, I would approach one of the organizations and say, do you want to host us this year? Something which I had learned at the International Federation of Accountants. So it's a role which I was very comfortable with. And so we would find somebody to host us in Vienna or in Nairobi or, anywhere else, and we would go. But this would be a United Nations organization, this time hosting us. And it would be a week's meeting. And at that meetings, of course, we would have presenters from the other organizations, the United Nations organization, telling us about their challenges, and would also discuss the common themes and things, and where we would have policies which are common or which are exceptional. So all that would be discussed, and obviously I would seek help from the host to support me in minute taking and recording and doing that. Then I would have to produce a report, 15 to 20 page report, and AI was not there then. So I'd record and then I would listen back and then I would write. It took me like a month to do the report and then pass it to my director, who would then take a look and give me comments. And then once it is approved, then we would circulate it. So that was really my bread and butter. My role was really to coordinate the implementation of the accounting standards, and also to tap into those who were developing them, and to share with the implementers and to get a perspective from the auditors and other stakeholders. And obviously would have some consultants who would come and share with us also something which they have done. We also tried from time to time to link up with our cousins or sisters, I don't know what the right term is, the people in the private sector, because they were implementing international financial reporting standards. So we sometimes want to look at the gap between them and us in the public sector and see if there are any lessons to be learned there in terms of the way forward. So it was a lot of moving parts for me. Remember, I was also attending the International Federation 4 meetings per year, and I was also organizing our meetings of our task force on accounting standards, the virtual and the annual one. Those were standing meetings, but we then also created committees now, which were looking at new stuff which was coming from the International Federation of Accountants. And we called these others like task forces. And so I would also feed into them and help them and support them as they prepared their policy drafts or proposals to be presented on accounting standards, before we then again link up sometimes with the International Federation of Accountants and say, hey, this is what we are thinking in terms of policies, in terms of this standard we are working on. Does this look reasonable? Do you think this makes sense? And of course, we'd also get in touch with the auditors and say, this is what we are thinking, this is what we are proposing. What do you think? Is this reasonable or is this not? And then we'll get all that feedback. But, pulling all those things into a report which makes sense is the challenge. And so it trained me in analysis. That's what I can say. In really looking at issues at at a low level and at a high level, and tease out those critical points and be able to make reasonable recommendations. I was fortunate everywhere. I had people who were very sharp and willing to share their knowledge and their skill with me. And also, I also have never, even up to now, never pretended that I know it all. I'm not that kind of person. Even when, I'm a pastor, I read the Bible, but I'm astounded at what, even now, we have teams which we have put our people in groups and we do Bible study, and we do just one verse or two verses. I'm astounded by the new revelations which they come up with, and I'm like, wow, I've been pastoring for like close to 20 years and I don't know this. So it is that humbling factor for me, even as a technical accounting specialist. I've never pretended to anyone to say I know it all. One of the things which we were tasked, because remember, as I said, the Secretariat is the largest of all the UN bodies, right? So we were tasked with training, developing training products, right? So we were given this task that we want you to develop computer-based training products, then classroom-based products. So we came up with 18 of these training products. And so I was the head of that team. We would now we engaged consultants. I think they were from India and from Washington, D.C. And so we discussed with the consultants what our expectations are on a particular standard, let's say standard number 1, which dealt with financial statements. So we discuss with them and then would come up with a training product where you are now giving it to someone out there in the field in Nairobi or in Argentina, and then they would follow through and say, oh, okay, this is how we do this one, this is how we do this one. And so my team and I developed those standards. And that's one of my highlights at the United Nations, that we developed. I think there were 11 computer-based standards and 7 illustrative accounting standard products. And it was an exciting time. And we also, the guys in India would start when we knock off, they start work. So we'd give them what we want them to work on. And then when we come on stream in the morning, they're also knocking off. So they would share with us, and then we'll continue to. So it was a continuous cycle like that. I thoroughly enjoyed that. We had our teams were made up of smart women and men. And they were not only just technicians in terms of making sure that the debits and the credits and the accounting rules are observed, but in terms of sprucing up and beautifying the product with the animations and all the other things, and even to the extent of the color to pick and what have you, the illustrations to pick, and we were in that team. I think we were 3 gentlemen and about 5 ladies. And we would always defer to the ladies in terms of color, because you could never, ever win the argument that let's put blue here or purple. But we had so much fun working on those standards. And then, of course, we presented the standards to the worldwide United Nations organizations, of course, the departments of accountants, and they were enthusiastically received and accepted, and we got commendations. The Secretary General gives annual prizes, 3 prizes per year. And in that year, which I can't remember now, 2018 or 17, we were nominated the third, we were in 3rd position. So we got our prize, but we were rooting for number 1, but number 1 went to somebody else, number 2, but we were nominated as the third group.
Yeah, still did well, I think.
Yes. So that's what kept me so long there.
A few questions that I've got here. In terms of somebody that dreams of moving abroad, say work at the United Nations, what's a non-negotiable thing for somebody to do?
Well, the United Nations, because of the competition, they start at the master's level. So if you don't have a master's, don't even waste your time. Just go and do your master's, and then then you can apply. So, and of course, if you have a professional qualifications in terms of the accounting, like your chartered accountancy or certified public accountant or something like that, your chances are even better. So even in your area of specialty, make sure you have a professional qualification or something which is in addition to your master's, because many people do have masters. So you have to have a competitive edge to be able to get in. Also, I would say just get in touch, get to know people who work for the United Nations. They will give you tips. Depends which area you want to go. We have many departments, the statistics and the politics and the security, the finance and budgets, the audit as well. They have an internal audit, which is big, so get to know some people there and get to be familiar with what goes on there, because if you're not, you can't get in. It's but it's a good place to work for. I have no regrets. It's a place which I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I felt so stretched but so challenged. And one thing I must say, of all the teams I worked with, very professional people, very helpful, humble people. Of course, we do have a lot of HR training in terms of diversity, different cultures. How do you work with other people who don't come from where you come, who don't look like you look, and all that. So that is also very helpful in preparing you for these positions. That's what I can say. You have to be qualified. There's no doubt about it. You have to network, get to know what is in there, get interested, and keep talking, keep checking, and the door will open for you.
Amazing. Then so for somebody, you are somebody who is kind of seen to all with up to, we're now going to talk about the retirement. But before we get to your retirement, what are the top 3 skills every professional needs right now when you reflect across your entire career?
Well, first of all, you have to have your core skill. Like my core skill is accounting, right? So to shove, even a tax shop needs an accountant. So you got to have that core skill. And that's not the only skill. I mean, so I'm saying have your core skill in whatever capacity, in whatever area, whether you're a statistician, an economist, or a security personnel, and so forth. Have that. Then, of course, as I said, you really need to have your master's or professional qualification or whatever it is. Learn to network. There's nothing which is you can't cut corners. Learn to network with people, and then people will let you know what is going on. And then be a true professional. Let your job or your work, let the quality of your work speak on your behalf.
Yeah.
right? Don't get in there and be sloppy and just, yeah, of course, I met a few people who were like, please get him out of our team, because there's no production there, but most people are true professionals. Be diligent, be respectful, because you are working in an intercultural, multicultural organization where people come from different places and understand things differently. So be open-minded. Don't be closed in and say, "Oh, in Zimbabwe, we don't." No, this is not Zimbabwe. This is, the world body. So it's a give and take. If there are issues, obviously, which you are not happy with, you speak up. You talk to them. And don't just be. I had maybe just one incident where I had to speak up and say, "No, I don't take this." This was to one of my bosses. I've had many bosses. I said, "I don't take this. You respect me, I respect you. You don't respect me, forget it. I will not respect you." And of course, that boss was astounded. He was taken aback, and he said, "Why?" I explained my reasons fully. And then that boss ended up apologizing, say, "Oh, Jerry, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that I'd really blown it." And so being nice and polite doesn't mean that you are a doormat and people just walk all over you and do whatever. No, I've never accepted that. Even as a Christian, I do not. I am firm about my beliefs, but I'm also polite. I'll put as diplomatically as I can, but I make my point felt. So communication is a critical skill if you are going to be successful.
Amazing. No, thank you so much. This is very helpful in terms of all the good work that you did at the United Nations, etc. So I want us now to talk about your retirement.
Meaningful carriers now. Take the time to take your destiny in your hands now. With meaningful carriers.